as mulheres levavam vida no cabelo. Essa é uma história que precisa ser contada. Entre santas, perversas e a famosa frase, aqui está por detrás de um grande homem, e é bom também a gente lembrar que está por trás de um grande homem é o encosto da cadeira e não as mulheres. Somos as mulheres concretas, as que trabalham no campo, nas fábricas, nas empresas, nas ONGs, nas escolas, nos movimentos sociais, na lida da casa, no voluntariado aqui do Fórum, as que contribuem para construir esta nação e as outras nações, as que resistiram à ditadura, as que perderam a vida lutando pela democracia, as que deram a vida para que muitas de nós pudéssemos estar aqui hoje. Porque graças a muitas mulheres, hoje podemos falar e ter força para continuar lutando para modificar e transformar esse mundo com mais mulheres e com as mulheres mais excluídas que podemos mudar esse lugar. Do momento é isso. Obrigada.
Bom, agora eu vou passar a palavra ao John Stanfield II. Please, that's your turn.
Vote hard.
Is it on?
Right.
Ok, boa tarde. Tudo bem? Given the fact that I have a very interesting American accent, I'm going to read my presentation. And the title of my presentation is different from what is printed in the program. The title of my presentation is They Don't Care About Us, Human Rights Thinking and Practice in Vocational and Technical Education, a social, political, philosophical, and politics of ethics assessment. They don't care about us. Human rights thinking and practice in vocational and technical education, a social, political, philosophical, and politics of assessment. This is an exercise in a social, political, philosophy, and politics of ethics of education and learning in the area of vocational and technical education, with a challenge to the younger generations, well below my chronological age, as well as to my generational peers and those chronologically somewhat a little older or younger, sitting in this space on this day, which I am honored to be among you. As you will see, I hope, affirmative action is an important subset of human rights thinking and policy practice, which has to be placed in the kind of broader, more fundamental, big critical thinking, big picture, my comments attempt to brush upon and brush against. In the American context, at least historically, vocational and technical education, henceforth called VTE, until recently, has been developed as a predominantly gendered and racialized sphere with obvious elite biases. Since the 1863 ending of the American Civil War and indeed even before it, VTE was indeed a major elite tool to create and to sustain the low, marginal, and excluded statuses of females and non-whites, especially blacks, indigenous peoples, and Latinos. Within the educational history of black people in America, this use of VTE as a tool of demographic group devaluation and exclusion was more than apparent in Booker T. Washington's Negro industrial education philosophy and its widespread use in developing white elite definitions and funding policies, which became a dominant paradigm in black post-secondary education in a segregated black college sector for decades. The idea and the practice of black industrial education was to equip blacks with VTE skills in a segregated society meant to develop, at best, segregated black middle classes and trade classes, and meagerly paying helping classes for service employment in white homes, such as cooks and housekeepers. This paternalistic and patronizing sensibility of black vocational and technical education has been breaking down rather quickly in the past 40 or so years. Though presently patronizing conceptions and practices of VTE still exists in poor urban areas where predators charging commercial VTE quick credentialing firms prey on the employment needs of the urban poor, often offering short-term certification programs which lead to great indebtedness with little, if not gainful, employment opportunities. When it comes to girls and women, the home economics curricula and secondary schools and the traditional institutions of higher learning and the commercial secondary schools were meant to prepare females for gender-segregated labor markets with low pay, or in the case of private households as housewives, no pay at all. So at least in America, what I just described about the roles of racialization and gender and VTE historically represents the history of the well-institutionalized human rights violations which characterized the sector for decades, since the development and functions of the VTE sector reproduced and sustained for many years a blatantly racist and blatantly sexist society. It is only recent years this racist and sexist image, in reality of VTE, has begun to change dramatically, while it is still quite dismal when it comes to what it means to and about the poor, irrespective of gender or socially and culturally defined ancestry or skin color. It is still presumed in America, like so many other countries, that poverty is equivalent to intelligence. And therefore, since so many poor people do not have the abilities to compete adequately for admission into standard institutions of higher learning, such as favela people in Brazil and poor whites and other kinds of poor non-whites in Brazil and other lands, the best they can do, so the stereotype goes, is to gain admission into VTE institutions, which publicly tend to be deemed as a myth as less than educational institutions in nations such as America, where working with your hands is deemed to be inferior to the liberal arts implications of working with your minds, as if it is really possible to separate the practice from the intellectual. But even this elitist perspective in the United States is beginning to change due to economic problems, which is resulting in Americans slowly but surely, seeing there is virtue, if not plain imperative, in exploring other options, such as VTE, as making choices in terms of educational options. Also, the rapid emergence of high tech has been making VTE a much more attractive sector in America in the high-tech communications world, with growing awareness that there is and always has been value in working with your hands to build things, to apply what you know, rather than merely being or becoming an armchair theorist. It is in the non-West, rather than in the West, that we see the most impressive understanding of VTE and its essential connections with traditional education and university attending tracks, mostly out of necessity when it comes to nation building and rebuilding. In countries such as Brazil, India, and South Africa, we observe elite policymakers understanding the necessity to leapfrog development in terms of development by extending viable VTE employment and entrepreneurship opportunities to the poor and options to citizens who may have the test scores or money to attend traditional liberal arts-oriented universities, but who prefer to go the VT route. This way of elite policy-making thinking is certainly convergent with the multiple human gifts perspectives of the past 25 or so years, which is in overdue fashion